Okay, so look, today we've got a special webinar for Mediation Awareness Week, and the topic is ODR, Online Dispute Resolution. So making use of technology to resolve conflict. We've got a special focus on family dispute resolution, but certainly not exclusively. So if anyone does have any comments about other types of dispute resolution or any questions, probably the chat box is a great way to get those questions, and we can bring those into the meeting. Now, I'm very lucky that Joel Kayed has come along. He's one of the co-founders of Dispute Resolution Online, and we're going to be doing a little bit of a case study about the work that they're doing in the ODR space. So welcome, Joe.
Hey, Joe. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yep, and I'll ask you maybe to tell us a little bit more about yourself and the organisation as we go through. But basically, the overview for what we're planning to do in this session is, why use technology? Just do some quick introductions. What is ODR? And we'll do the case study on RDO. As you know, mediators love acronyms, so we've got here. And any questions or more information. So I often like to use this this diagram, this metaphor for conflict, because for me it makes such a lot of sense that we know that conflict or even violence is an escalation. Sometimes it can be very quickly escalated and sometimes slowly, but ultimately this move from peace into disputes and conflict is predictable, and it is something that we can intervene in. The reason for using online dispute resolution is because it's got two very major advantages. One is time, that it can be put in place very quickly, and it cuts out some of the delays that relate to having to find a space and people and get everything coordinated. So the dispute resolution process can be waiting for the dispute rather than the dispute occurring and then needing to put all of those things in place. And the other thing is money. So some of the overheads and other costs can be reduced or controlled with the online process. So from my point of view, those are the two main reasons why people would be looking at using technology to enable or even replace the human involvement in dispute resolution. So, the traditional approach to dispute resolution was we bring people into a room or a place and sit them down and talk it through. The problems are that it takes time to coordinate to get everyone in that same place at the same time. It takes more time on the day to travel to the meeting, pay for transport, parking, all of those things, all of the waiting around that happens, often waiting around of people that are paid, quite high hourly rates, which certainly contributes to cost. Meeting rooms, overheads, all of those things. So a lot of people have been thinking about, there must be a better way, and that's where we come across online dispute resolution. So I'm Joanne Law, I'm Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support, which is a not-for-profit working in the area of family dispute resolution. My personal mission is I'm on a mission to reduce and prevent family violence and conflict, and all of these efforts that I do are around helping people to resolve disputes peacefully. And as I mentioned, Joe's joined us today to talk about what's happening with resolve disputes online. So, Joe, would you like to maybe just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Joe, I thought that summary that you did about, the volcanic image of how dispute resolution gets involved, but how you can start looking further down the mountain to actually having that preventable type concept, I think makes an awful lot of sense. From my perspective, I've often been involved at. So I think I'm muted at the moment.
No, you're fine.
I'm okay. There we go. Yeah, from my perspective as a barrister and as a solicitor and a mediator of over 10 years experience, I've normally been at the cure point, which, I have to say can be quite a frustrating point to get it involved in, because a lot of the damage has been done at that stage. But from my own sort of perspective in terms of technology, we started building Resolve Disputes Online about three or so years ago. We're a collection of practitioners from the UK. You can perhaps tell from the accent. I am originally from the UK, but I live in Sydney, and the company is based in London and in Sydney. We have practitioners from Australia and Canada also who have been involved in the building of the platform. And the platform essentially allows for the arbitration or the mediation process to take place online. And typically what we do is we license our technology to either courts or tribunals or large mediation centres. So from that end of the scale, all the way to solo practitioners. And it's been a really exciting journey, particularly in the last 12 months, where we've noticed a lot of uptake on online dispute resolution, particularly in jurisdictions like Singapore and Canada, which has been fascinating. There's definitely a move going on in Oz at this stage. Some of the larger entities in government, for example, are showing a big interest. But for me, it's still got a long way to go in terms of getting it used on a greater scale amongst sole practitioners. And I think it can really offer so many of the advantages that you talk about. Not only just larger organizations and governments, but if you're a sole practitioner, you've got your own branded service that can onboard various parties in. It looks great from a marketing point of view, and the whole idea is to grow access to justice and to grow the access of mediation services, because we all know it's a great product. I've been mediating for over 10 years. It's a fantastic product. And using technology, we can probably get our message out as practitioners a lot better if we have an online service. And it takes away all that friction, and those barriers that maybe make mediation not quite as attractive as it could be. Because it's a beautiful, flexible process, but it's often hampered by the litigation sort of style of going physically live to the same place and all the associated costs of time. So it's a really fascinating time for this type of technology, I think.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Joe. And look, what I'm going to do now is perhaps give a little bit of context about the spectrum of what's going on in online dispute resolution, and then we'll ask you to explain a little bit more about the approach that you've taken with Resolve Disputes Online.
Great.
Thank you. So firstly, just to make sure we're all on the same page about what is online dispute resolution. So there's various ways of defining it, but what I'm proposing is it's basically the use of technology to facilitate the resolution of disputes between parties. So I'm looking at that as a very broad approach. So there's the option of direct negotiation, so without an independent third party involved, so using a platform that creates that ability to negotiate directly, and eBay makes use of some of that sort of technology. And I think we might have, I'll just mute you, Danny. I'm getting a bit of feedback in the background there. Mediation, where there's an independent mediators facilitating, but using technology to enable that. And probably increasingly using AI in technology, artificial intelligence in technology to be a mediator. So rather than a human using an interface. And then arbitration. So in arbitration, the outcome, it's a binding resolution. So basically making use of technology to facilitate or enable a conclusion that's imposed on the parties. So that's the sort of spectrum from fully themselves right up to giving the ability to make a determination to within an online dispute resolution process. So one of the terms that are used is regarding the technology as the fourth party. So in a typical mediation, you've got party A and party B, party 1, party 2, which may be individuals or it may be organisations. Then you've got your mediator, conciliator or arbitrator, so the third party who's independent. And then we have the fourth party, which is the ICT, the Information and Communication Technology. And if we're looking at the spectrum, which is these little steps here, and I'm not implying that we're going to a point where humans won't ever be involved and everything's going to be automated and AI. I don't think we'll see that. But there's certainly in some contexts we're already there. And it's an option for very small disputes for certain contexts. So it's either assisted, so dispute resolution conducted by a human with information communication technology assistance, to the middle ground where the process can't work without the ICT involvement. So sometimes it's only an escalation to a human. So it's really the first part is and some of the disputes are resolved through use of technology right through to full. So that's a bit of context to think about. When we're talking about the automated negotiation, still getting some feedback. I might just mute you in the background, Joe. I think it might be from your end. Yep. So we look at automated negotiation. So one of the technologies in use at the moment is the use of blind bidding negotiation. So it's a little bit like a silent auction, and it's mainly being used in commercial disputes, insurance negotiations, where there's an amount of money, a dollar amount being negotiated. And the technology is kind of like the mediator in the background who's aware of the zone of possible agreement, so they know what the high and the low figures are that each party would be accepting or offering. And the parties put in their bids of what they'd accept and what they're willing to propose. And once they get within a certain distance, then the technology will make basically split the difference, and that's the settlement amount. So an interesting approach. I'm wondering, I haven't heard that it's being used in family law property settlements, but I'd wonder if at some point it might be. But basically it's approach that can be fully automated if the parameters of the situation. Some processes use AI to try and perhaps enhance the benefits or the incentive for being more willing to compromise, and so there's a benefit for being more flexible built into the algorithm that's used. So an interesting approach. Assisted negotiation. So this is where we're using technology to provide the structure. It may also provide legal information and evaluation. With Interact Support, with the not-for-profit that I founded, we exclusively use video mediation for family law mediation services. So that's to keep our prices down. We don't have any venue costs and travel expenses or anything like that. so that keeps our prices low. And we use things like shared Excel spreadsheets and documents like that to help facilitate the process. So what we do with Interact couldn't exist if there wasn't internet. We can't provide the services to people who don't have access to the internet. So it is integral to what we do. And something interesting I found as I was looking, a proposal for crowd justice. So for small things that would normally go to the small claims court, they're looking at creating some sort of interface where people can present their cases to the crowd and get an outcome from a judgment. So if that's something that intrigues you, there's the address crowdjusticenow.org to go and explore. So I'm not quite sure. I perhaps don't have as much faith in the crowd as some people might, but anyway, it's another way of looking at how we might be able to use technology. Now we're on to resolve disputes online. So this is the organisation that Joe's been instrumental in setting up. It's something we're talking with RDO to look at whether we can perhaps come up with some way to have a platform available for Mediation Institute members, particularly new practitioners who are starting out, that can't really afford the infrastructure for themselves necessarily, and looking at some way we can create a shared platform for people to get started. But what I might do is hand over to you, Joe. I'll unmute you and perhaps give us a little bit more context about the approach that you're doing with RDO, perhaps why you thought of it and where it fits in that continuum.
Yeah, well, there's loads of points really that I could say about a lot of the fascinating things that you've raised, Joe, with that summary, a very concise summary, I think, of the current state of play in relation to artificial intelligence. We're probably not quite in that stage at this moment where we're foreseeing sort of robotic mediators. The whole premise of RDO is, you probably saw from the logo, the sort of birds on the wire, is we think dispute resolution should be natural. We think it should be simple, and we think it should be as effortless as possible and as accessible to as many people as possible. And that's really why it all started. It started because we as practitioners, both in ADR and as lawyers, just thought, whether it's in the UK or Australia, sophisticated jurisdictions, the access to justice piece just isn't really working. We've got still Victorian type institutions that are being used to resolve sometimes the most traumatic and sensitive of disputes, very much the ones that you're probably very familiar with in your practice. And that's why we built this flexible online dispute resolution technology that allows parties to, have a case management tool built in, to have the audio and video tools all built in, to have the file sharing information all built in, to even build in a settlement builder, to essentially mean that if you're a mediator in any jurisdiction, you could, in theory, take a license to the technology and start mediating all your cases. And just to give you a sort of brief summary as to who's using it at the moment, I mean, we have the largest mediation centre in Asia using it at the present time for commercial cases under $250,000. And that's been very fascinating because you get people from all different walks of life using it. And that in itself is a really key point for us to touch on, I think, which is, if any practitioners are looking at this space with a bit of interest, I would say that, you need to probably bear in mind your client profile and what cases you might do. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Is that in Singapore?
It is. It is in Singapore. Yeah, exactly.
Hub for international dispute resolution, isn't it?
It is. It is. You know, but having said that, whilst in the commercial space, I think it probably goes to the power of the process. You know, you've got interest in the commercial space, but then there's also tools within the RDO platform that lend itself very well to family disputes, and even disputes which could involve very serious issues like domestic violence, insofar as you know, rather than something like Zoom or Skype, where as soon as you know the credentials of somebody, you can start to message them and you can initiate video conferences with them. In the RDO platform with family practitioners, there's a bit of traction developing because we've got flexibility that can stop people from sending a message directly from one party to another party. And that's why, like, as you touched on earlier, you know, sort of the whole notion of online dispute resolution is extremely broad, and it's almost impossible to capture every single facet of it. But the key point to take away is, if you've got a good suite of tools or technology or a good service provider, you can tweak certain workflows of RDO to fit in with the types of cases that you're doing. And I think that's probably the important takeaway for me as a practitioner. When I was looking at this space about 10 years ago, using Skype as a landlord and tenant mediation tool, you know, I was thinking, like, where's my data? Is it safe? You know, is the client data going all around the world to the US servers, or, you know, is it being, you know, kept somewhere more central in the UK as it was then? And also things like, you know, if my two clients knew each other's Skype address, would they start sending, you know, some messages to each other? Do I want that in this particular type of dispute? Is it appropriate for me to have that option for them, or do I want something a bit more closed down? And, you know, just like you intimated, you know, the idea of having lots of good tools, or one good tool that has lots of different features, is probably a good thing for practitioners to look at, to work out whether or not it's suitable for their kind of caseload.
Yeah, Joe, I just asked if anyone's got any questions, and Louise wanted to know what sort of costs that are associated with a platform like this.
Yeah, so we basically, the way that we cost it for sole practitioners is there's a one-off setup fee, and then there would be thereafter a license fee, which basically is determined by the amount of cases that you choose to put through the system, and the number of neutrals that you might have. So starting off, obviously, it would just be you as the main neutral, you as the administrator, and maybe you'd have 10 case credits to start with. And then as you got busier, you could probably scale that up. You could add another neutral if you had a colleague who wanted to come into your service, and scale it up from there. But the setup fee, the one-off setup fee, is 500 Australian dollars, and then the license fee will depend on how many case credits that you buy. But if people wanted to know a little bit more, I could send them the PDF with the solo practitioner price points on if they were interested.
Okay. And sorry, Danny, I saw your question, thought it was Louise that was asking it. So Louise, did you have a different question you wanted to ask? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Thanks for that, Joe. You're both Joe.
Yeah.
Both Joes. With something like the Zoom platform, did you consider that didn't have the safeguards that you were looking for?
Joe, yeah, look, from our point of view, Zoom works okay if you do a unique number for each meeting, but it certainly doesn't have the sophistication that Joe's got built into his platform. So we did a demo the other day, and yeah, it's a lot more secure. But I think it's. But I definitely Skype is yeah, you shouldn't use it. Don't use Skype because it gives away people's own individual details.
Mm.
Yeah. So Joe, so what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, in terms of, if I just give a quick summary as to how I started out on this, when I qualified as a mediator about 12 years ago, and I was doing all the sort of low end landlord and tenant cases, we were using Skype, and it was only after perhaps a year or so. I mean, it was relatively early on in the ODR sort of world, really. And we had landlords who were dotted all around the UK. Some of them were even in Europe. So it did lend itself well, and it was a better alternative to telephone. But when we started drilling down into, the amount of information that was getting sent across and where it was actually being hosted, and obviously I had a duty of confidentiality to the client, and there were concerns, when you look at the terms of use about, the ability to listen into conversations, or the ability to hear or view conversations. We soon realised that it wasn't really a satisfactory way forward. So things like end-to-end encryption, which is what we have in the platform, are really, really key things that you're doing. I mean, some of these video tools are great. I mean, look at this webinar that we're doing now. It's a good experience. It's great for those sorts of things. But the moment that you are dealing with highly sensitive dispute resolution, it means that there has to probably be some governance in that process. If you've got a user coming into a system, they need to know that they're clicking a user agreement, that this is a dispute resolution tool, your information is going to be secure, it's encrypted, and even it goes as far as not allowing a particular party to contact you. Because once I know somebody's Zoom account or their Skype account, I can start sending them lots of messages. And then, like a DV case or something like that, you just would not want that sort of scenario. So I think some tools are great to play with and have a little feel of how it could be like. But when you start to get serious in this business, then I think it's much better to get a tool that has some governance around it and more security. So I think that would be my takeaway thoughts, really.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I did like with what you're doing is that signing documents, getting those disclosures and that sort of thing as part of the process is all automated. So that saves a lot of time and emails.
Yeah, it does. And the other thing I'd say to people who are interested in this space is that there's a lot of people who talk about ODR and say that it has to be one or the other. You're either face to face or you're online. I'm not a huge believer that has to be the case. I actually think that you could, if you wanted to, you could use your dispute resolution tool to supplement your face to face practice. In that, you load the parties on it, you get all the information exchanged, you get the pre-mediation agreement signed off. Maybe you even do the the pre-mediation conference online, and then you actually do the face-to-face piece. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And I just notice a lot of commentators in the area think it's either all online or it's all face-to-face.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And look, with Interact support with the not-for-profit, it's just basically our structure that we use online only. But if people want face-to-face, then we refer them through to practitioners for face-to-face. So we can do the risk screening and the initial setup and then get them on. Because, it should be what's going to work best for the clients ultimately. But having some options. So now I see Danny. It looks like you're quite interested in the thing. So Danny, have you got sound? I'm not sure if you actually have a working mic, because you're welcome to come in.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, sorry guys. Yeah, I've got sound.
Excellent. Well, hear you. So you're asking what the monthly license fee. So it was 500 Australian to sort of get set up in the system, and then I think you get 10. You buy 10 client packs or something like that as a starter. Is that how it works, Joe? You're on mute.
Yeah, so what I can do, Danny, is, as Joe said, that there's a one-off setup fee that you pay to get your branding and everything all built into the platform. So to your clients, it looks like it's your personal service. But then the license fee component, it would depend on the number of case credits that you want. But like I said, I don't know if you caught it earlier, but I'm very happy if you want to send your email address to me or whatever it is, I can send you a PDF that details all the pricing, and it'll answer questions like, tech support and various other things that once you start looking into it, there'll be typical questions that spring to mind. So if that's of interest, very happy to send that information across.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Joe, do you want to maybe just pop your email address in the chat box?
Yeah, that's a good idea. What sort of work do you do then, Danny? On your online platform, on Zoom?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, look, I'm doing obviously online dispute resolution. So I don't deal in family law. I do more commercial matters and contract disputes and those kinds of things.
Yeah.
So I do a little bit of family law, but not in the sense of 60I certificates, which we do in Australia. I do like more private mediation after a case has already been ongoing for some time and not been resolved.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm also the chairman of the Australian Paralegal Foundation, and we've got about 4,000 odd members online in our Facebook group, and we've got a family law group with over 1,000 members online that sort of jump in and interact there with their questions. So from that, that's where I source a lot of the clients from, basically.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
excellent. Well, we'll be putting this recording up on the Mediation Awareness Week or a link through on the website. So if you do want to share with anyone in your group, you'll be able to, and certainly connect with Joe directly. Now, with Zoom, we actually found a vulnerability the other day. We were doing a role play and had someone on hold on a private session, and their internet disrupted for a moment, and they came back into the meeting and they were actually able to hear and see what was going on. We talked to Zoom about it, and you have to use the waiting room feature, which you experienced in the start of this meeting. That way, if someone goes out of a meeting and comes back in, they'll go into the waiting room and won't be able to access the meeting until you let them back in. So I'd never had that happen before. It was just an incident. Unfortunately, it was during a role play rather than a real mediation, but it could have been, it was a very significant issue potentially if it was a real mediation and someone was privy to a conversation that should have been confidential. So I hope that can't happen in your platform, Joe. Oh, you're on mute at the moment. Oh.
No, it can't. But as chance would have it, a fire alarm has just gone off. So I'll put my mute back on, and I will just walk around to the safe zone. So just bear with me.
Oh, so it's a real one. Oh dear. Okay. Well, if we don't.
The drill.
Sunny drill. Good. Yeah. I was going to say if we don't see you, let's hope you're safe. Goodness. Okay, so has anyone else got any comments or thoughts about any of the different types? Have you experienced Louise?
Yeah, I just had a couple more comments questions about Zoom.
Yeah.
Joanne, do you know if you can prevent people from recording?
Yes, I think in the back end, if you go to Zoom, there's if you click on settings and then you click on advanced settings, it'll take you to their online options, and their settings there. That's where you have to go to enable putting people on hold, and also you should, I'm now aware, enable having the waiting room so that people can't just automatically come into the meeting. But I think you can disable recording, but it will always show up in the top corner if there's a recording going on. So even if it wasn't you that set the recording going, you'll still see that little recording button up at the top. So you will have that visual cue. So they won't be able to do it covertly. I mean, obviously someone could set up a phone or a camera on their desktop, on their their environment. They can have someone on the other side of the room listening. Look, we don't have the same level of control over the confidentiality that we would in a in a face-to-face where we put them in a room and we control the environment. I mean, even there, someone could have their phone on record or recording device in their handbag or pocket. So ultimately, I guess it's what are they going to do with that information? They're still not going to be able to use it as evidence, whether in a court case or anything like that. And it's information they've heard. So if they're intending to make use or misuse it, it is something they know. But yeah, it's one of the vulnerabilities certainly of online.
And can you also disable the chat box?
I don't know if you can.
So that they're not making threatening comments.
I haven't tried. But look, if someone was making threatening, whether they could make direct comments directly back to and forward to each other. That's an interesting one. I hadn't thought about that because, if it was to the group, obviously you'd see. I'll investigate that because I haven't had an issue with that coming up, but it certainly could. We were just talking up, Joe, in case you missed us, and I'm glad to see you're not burning down or anything with Zoom, whether chats can be turned off. With your platform, what I liked is that it keeps a record of every interaction that occurs.
Yeah, I mean, Louise, I think I caught the end of your point just as I was getting told to be. Just I was being told to go back, and there was no need for me to go outside, which was very helpful. But like this idea of direct messaging can, in some cases, be useful. Believe it or not, actually, in some commercial cases, when the two directors are starting to talk, that can be very powerful. But in some cases, Joe will have dealt with many of them. You do need to have an ability to keep the communications completely separate, and we have basically the ability to stop direct communications between certain parties. So then you don't have the ability to send a direct message, from husband to wife or whatever else might be the particular scenario. To me, that's very important to have that flexibility, because in mediation, no size fits all. There isn't one blueprint that you can build into a piece of technology. And obviously, having done it myself for over 10 years, I was aware of this. It was very important for me to say to people who were building the platform, when you asked, for example, do you want all the parties to message each other? Well, in some cases, yes, and Zoom's probably great for that, But actually, there are other cases where you do not want any information to be exchanged between party A and party B. So I think, I don't know if Zoom has that functionality of stopping people from talking. There might be something where you can block somebody, but I find that highly unlikely. If Zoom's like a collaboration tool, in what instances are we going to be? In what instances, a colleague going to be trying to block each other, on a conference call, or clients, trying to block each other from communicating. So I'm not entirely sure that that's something that they have in, but yeah, any ODR tool that has high risk clients who are volatile, you want to be able to control that interaction via the mediator. I think. Yeah,
well, that's right. I mean, ultimately, for minor threats and disagreeable things, the person would complain about it. But if it was something major, they might be too frightened to. So yeah, there's definitely a vulnerability there.
Well, I just did a test. I sent a private message to Danny.
Yeah.
And he's responded that he can see it. Can anyone else see it? Can the two Joes see them?
No.
No.
No. At the moment, with the settings, you definitely can. I'll need to have a look and see if there's settings at the back where I can disable private chats.
Yeah. It's not so much the point of being able to send a private message, because that's obviously something that Zoom allows you to do, is actually being able to stop the private message, isn't it, Louise? Really, and I think,
So look, I think.
I've just had a look. Sorry to interrupt. I've just had a look on the settings in Zoom. You can disable it. There's settings there allow participants to send messages to visible participants. You can enable or disable that. You can enable or disable private chat, and you can enable or disable saving of chats. So the settings are there.
Yeah, they do have a fair degree of granularity in what you can adjust. It's just a matter of working out. But that's a good point. I hadn't. That would be something. There's no reason why participants in a real mediation should be sending private chats. So if it's something they want to share information, that should be done with the full view of the mediator. So those settings would be worth fixing up. So look, as I was saying, I think the future of ODR is going to be more towards this consolidation, forming platforms like you've done, Joe, to bring everything together, because organisations and individuals are using CRM, client relationship management. They're using email in some form or email into their system, and then standalone video platforms like Zoom and other things. So information can potentially be vulnerable, as you say, depending on where it's being stored, and depending on the type of mediation. That could be a real issue if we're talking about particularly large commercial matters where there might be an incentive to really try and hack that information. There could be a problem.
Yeah.
I think I'd imagine, and I know that there's some efforts to try and get software that will evaluate and come up with a proposed resolution and things like that. Have you had anyone at all seen any of that software in action?
No, I've only seen software that would go, well, not software per se, but technology that would have said, you've registered a breach of contract case, the average amount of damages that one gets for this type of case is X, and you're you're asking for Y in your quantum. What is it? Why do you think that your case should get more? So I think there's definitely tools out there that are being able to average out the amount of quantum in that particular type of scenario. But I haven't seen huge amounts of development in that space yet. But I think it's coming. Yeah.
I've worked with some who are trying to do it in family law property, but I'm not sure they really understand that it's not as formulae as you'd hope. It's just the law is, well, certainly here in Australia, is so ambiguous as to how much weight and that sort of thing. So creating an AI would basically it would be very likely, I feel, to lead to abusive process, because it would tell people this is what should be the outcome, and it can't actually reliably replicate what a judge might decide.
Yeah. And the other point that comes out of that as well, which is fascinating, is at the moment you get a platform that's kind of suggesting things to parties as they're going through the process, at what point does that then become legal advice, or is it legal information? I'm sure our friends at the Law Society will be telling us, this is getting precariously close to legal advice. Yeah. Are you going to be putting some checks into your tool that's giving suggestions? And you might say, well, you don't need it when there's lawyers in the process, because obviously the lawyer's there to guide the process. But if you have it when they haven't got lawyers, well, then they're even more vulnerable to thinking, well, I'm going to pick an example. My personal injury case, the system's telling me is worth, $500,000, or sorry, it's telling me it's worth $100,000, but it's actually worth $500,000 according to my lawyer. Well, there's a bit of slippage there.
Yes.
And my own perspective of dealing with these technologies is I'm a big believer in the augmented reality. I still think that there's a place for human judgment in all of these processes, whether that's mediators or lawyers, to be able to combine maybe the repetitive stuff that wastes their time, that's formulaic. But once that bit's done, I think then the real magic is having that human judgment, and I still think that if I was going through a really important case in my life, I think I'd want a human to be involved. Who knows what the next generation might be asking for, but I don't know.
That's right. Yeah. Saying, we don't want people making these sorts of decisions. But I tend to agree. But there's certainly, as with everything, there's the potential of going too far, and we need to be aware of that. But there's certainly some very valuable tools becoming available for the repetitive things and for accessibility. There's some work being done certainly around community justice and really quick responses. So landlord tenant, particularly at the very low end, there's some work being done of text or MySpace or chat or whatever technology people are using to try and sort things out so people don't end up getting kicked out of their rentals. In the US, I saw some work being done there in other areas. So that taking the time out of it is something that I think is very exciting. That opportunity of fastness.
Yeah, it is. And I think the other point that comes to mind as well is it really, ODR's applicability depends so much on the nature of the cases that you're dealing with. If Danny was looking to resolve his a high value contract dispute on a platform, then having it as automated as possible, his clients would be thinking, well, hang on, this is actually quite a complicated breach of contract matter that needs careful consideration of construction of terms and various other points. Whereas, as you've indicated, Joe, someone who needs a quick outcome on a low-value landlord and tenant that just needs an answer, am I getting kicked out next month or not? Then that's where that high-volume, low-value type system, like the eBays of this world, really leverage that technology well. But I think for me, it's using an ODR in more complex cases is really where the RDO platform fits in that spectrum, really, for those more sophisticated or sensitive matters where trying to automate all the processes might not necessarily be a value add at the end of the process.
No, absolutely. And I think being able to time shift, so if you get to a certain point and realise we need more information, okay, we're going to adjourn, get that information, bring it back in and then resume, gives a great deal more flexibility than, we're all in the room, we want to get this sorted and perhaps crash through when you maybe shouldn't. I think we've all heard of experiences where people, resolution by exhaustion rather than, something that's really a sustainable and fair outcome.
So I've got a question around user experience of the whole process.
Yeah.
The reason why I ask is in my other business a couple of years ago, I was looking at doing free introductory webinars just to explain the services. And so this is to members of the public. And I had to give up in the end because I just had so many people who couldn't use the technology. They wouldn't read any emails that you'd send about, preparing them a few minutes beforehand, and so they didn't have the software on the computer, and then they'd be late, and then they didn't know how to connect up a microphone or a speaker, and of course I couldn't see what system they had on their end, whether it was Windows or Android or Mac, and what type, whether it was Bluetooth speaker and all that. I couldn't help them because I didn't know what. And if you've got multiple people coming in to a session and they've all got these problems, I just found it didn't work. So in the end, what I did was I recorded a dummy webinar with participants who were tech savvy, and just point people to that to watch the recording instead. So I gave up. But what kind of user experiences have you had?
Yeah, varied. Yeah, you're quite right. And look, definitely there can be problems getting onto the tech. I think it's changing. And right at the beginning, Joe, you mentioned that you saw an increase in interest coming now. Certainly in Australia, one of the barriers is the quality of the internet. Like we get frequent dropouts and all sorts of things with people, just because of poor quality internet. But yeah, you do need a simple tool. Zoom is quite simple because it's got a link, and that I find that people can generally use that even if it's just on their mobiles, which you get a lot of shots of hair nose. But what's your experience, Joe? And you're on mute.
Yeah, I think Louise has hit the nail on the head, really, in that this technology for mediators or for access to justice or resolution is probably only as good as how easy it is to actually use. Because at the end of the day, if you want to get mass adoption to dent into the access to justice piece, then you need it to be as easy to use as possible. And Louise, I can certainly sympathise with you. Probably the hours you may have spent trying to talk to users about, are you on an iOS? Are you on an Android? Are you on a Mac? Are you on a PC? Are you on Windows 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever? I don't think there is Windows 9 actually, but it creates an infinite amount of friction, which the technology is designed to try and reduce. We, in fact, in our platform now, we have a setup wizard that will tell us exactly all the different technology that you're using. Using a PC, a Mac, using, have you got a firewall? So I don't know if you had any fun with firewalls, but those as well with our government clients, particularly in Singapore, they're behind firewalls all the time. So are big insurers, so are big law firms. So being able to find really sort of 1-2-click workarounds to those things, absolutely massive for the mass adoption. But I would qualify it all by saying, if you have any sense that your practitioner or your parties are not tech savvy, then it might not be the forum to use for those parties.
Yeah.
But as time goes on, the more and more demands we're going to have as practitioners of, I've got family commitments, I've got these commitments, can we do the dispute resolution process online? Because that's what we expect from everything else. We expect that from our banking. How many of us go and meet our bank managers now? We just don't do it. You get it on demand, you get it live, and all the other things that we do is in exactly the same way. So the trend is certainly taking us towards, and it's not 20 years time, it's the next 3 to 5 years where the volumes of claimants and participants in dispute resolution are going to be asking for that. And then it'll be killing two birds with one stone insofar as they might be a bit more native to technology. So all that friction that you were talking about might not be quite as severe then in the future as perhaps it has been. So I think that those are points which have certainly been part of my experience. Trying to get somebody to load up Skype 10 years ago was hard work. It really was really hard work, and having things that are browser based, like 1-click, 2-click, is where it needs to be, I think. And Zoom, in fairness, does have a good way of getting people into things. But then there's other points where, of course, it doesn't quite have that total sort of online dispute resolution solution built in. But yeah, really interesting point. No, are you still doing those webinars or those online? No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's look. I've noticed I'm starting to get inquiries from people saying that they've been looking for someone to be able to do online dispute, video mediation for them. That they're located in different cities. So this year I've been starting to get those inquiries, whether it's just because we're getting out that we're doing it more, or whether there's more demand for it. The other thing is certainly with Interact, because we work in that family law area, we often have people who actually don't have access to the internet because they've left their family home and things like that. So we leverage the support service network. So a lot of our referrals come in through from Salvation Army or those other services, and often the client can be with the worker, their support worker in their office doing their meetings. Which again, two birds with one stone. It means that they've got support there at their end, and also they've got technology that we've got someone that can help. That's the other thing I've noticed. I've had a few things where we've got situations where a mediator might be in the room with one person and the other person's online. From an ethical point of view, I would say that is extraordinarily bad practice and shouldn't be done. Unfortunately, it's being done in some of our large publicly funded family dispute resolution services, according to clients. We need to just keep track and remember procedural fairness and the same things that apply if we're in a room face to face, they still apply if we're using technology. So we need to make sure we can remain even-handed and in our role as that third party, even if the fourth the fourth party's there helping. So notice we're just about out of time. So any final reflections or comments?
Just thank you for a great discussion.
Thank you. Yeah,
very informative.
Thank you, Jo. Yeah.
Area. So, and thank you very much, Jo, for your contribution and sharing a bit about what you're doing there. Thank you all. And as I said, I'll be putting this up on the Mediation Awareness Week website and links out through Mediation Institute. This webinar is hosted by Mediation Institute, and check the site for what else is on this week as well. Okay. Thanks,
Jo.
Thanks, Jo.